Oh, Mr. Goodson.
You want to speak?
Speaking of Olivenhain.
Okay.
Good evening. My name is Randy Goodson. Thank you, Mayor and Council, for all the time you're putting into figuring out how to comply with state law. I'm here representing myself and my partners, Mr. and Mrs. Gaffney, and as we've talked to you, our plans are to build a senior citizen apartment community. And in the list of various experts that your consultant spoke with, I didn't see anyone that represents the senior apartment community. And it's evident in the development standards as well, because the senior apartment community has a bunch of different features from a standard apartment building, from a lot more community space, big community rooms, large exercise rooms, massage rooms, places for assistance when it's necessary for medical reasons. And this is integrated to the table that your consultants put up that was really that idyllic square, flat piece of property that, and unfortunately there was, the square footage numbers were shown there, 685 square feet or 1,000 or so square feet, which is, and your consultants, to be clear, of course, they said, we hope you don't focus on that number. Of course, everyone's going to focus on that number, but that number is completely unachievable. Even for a standard apartment building, they identified corridors, but you still have workout facilities. You have a lot of amenities in the community, in the buildings. You have your elevators, mechanical, and things like that. So if you're going to look at square feet of units, it'd be better to look at something that's representative of some of the parcels that you have, because none of them are flat squares. And when you look at, when you incorporate all of the actual design criteria, you're going to end up with a lot smaller units than are reflected in that table. And then it's even more accentuated when you get to senior apartments. And some of the things that I'd like to point out is that your parking ratio, should be a lot lower, like a quarter space per unit. You should allow parking lifts. A lot of times when cars are there, they're there because they don't want to get rid of them, and it's almost in storage. And you take it out on Sunday, or their family comes and they get to drive their car. And so parking lifts are very common. Private storage is not, it's not outside the unit. They'll never get it. Their family makes them get rid of everything. If it's not in your unit, there's no private storage, and that needs to be a lot smaller. Elevators. Elevators are an absolute necessity. To have an elevator, you need a 10-foot, I'll wrap up in just a moment. For an elevator, you need to have 10 feet above your top floor, because you need to have the elevator service area above the elevator. And so with just 4 feet above your top floor, you're not accommodating an elevator, which makes it really a real challenge to be able to accommodate any elevator in any project, but particularly senior apartments. And if you want to have 3-story walk-up units without elevators, then your plan's fine. But more and more the market is for elevators. You still have to have ADA compliance. And my last thing would be your net lot area. The lot coverage really does matter. You have open space, the open space calculations, and for senior communities, it's not as much outside, but it's inside space. So if you're able to have inside space be treated as your common areas, then I think there's opportunities there. But just please consider the senior apartment needs and things like that.
Well, thank you, Mr. Goodson, for those comments on the proposed development standards, which
Great,
I appreciate.
I have a question for
to you.
So when you say senior apartment complex, that's different than senior care facility, right? And when you say senior apartment complex, are these individual units each with their own efficiency kitchen, or is there shared kitchen space? How does what you're proposing or what you're thinking about developing look?
Exactly as you described it. You put your comments are right on point. To the difference is a A senior care facility does not have a kitchen. It's not zoned for kitchens. They're not allowed to have kitchens. All the food service has to occur in a common area. For senior apartments, it's independent living. And so they're apartments. They're designed a little bit differently. The kitchens will be a little bit different. Every unit's ADA, an ADA unit. And there's a few other things. If you think of an apartment building, you have a certain percentage of just standard apartments that have to be ADA accessible units. But in your senior unit, they're all ADA units. They're absolutely independent living apartment units. There's a separate care facility because sometimes, from time to time, that independence is, not.
Thank you.
Possible.
I think the points that he makes are pretty important. I know we seem to be getting a lot of senior care facility development, and these senior apartments are pretty important. So whether it's a deficiency on our zoning code or development standards, whatever it is, maybe we should be looking more closely at identifying these deficiencies and solving that problem.
I just want to pick up on that because that's not a question for you, but for our staff. So in terms of my understanding with these development standards are that we're trying to effectuate that 25 to 30 dwelling units per acre. In other words, we're trying to clear some of the constraints for affordable housing. So is it the fact that some of these other developers that may be developing senior assisted facilities or senior apartments that you've not met with them, is it because that they're not affordable housing per se? Is it why haven't we? Because are these applying just to affordable housing units, and if the senior assisted facilities are not affordable, do these apply to them?
It was never an intention to preclude discussions of senior developers. Because I think there's a possibility of senior units to be considered in the same category of the 25 DU per acre as well as affordable. So that being said, I would think that the same development standards would be considered. What was distinguished in the comments that were made is the senior apartments versus assisted living. And we want to ensure that we're talking about units that can be counted towards our affordable units so that they are actually livable living units, not care facilities.
So if they're care facilities, they would not count toward our affordable housing?
That's correct.
Would these standards apply in that situation?
These standards would not apply to care facilities. Those are entirely separate use.
With apartments where they would account, they would be allowed to count for affordable housing?
And let's be careful about saying they will count for affordable housing. We can take credit against our arena numbers, but when it's actually built, only the affordable units will count towards the affordable housing. And we'll have to replace, I assume if it's a 15% inclusionary in the future, that 85% we'd have to replace either through buffer or upzoning. So these are market rate units.
So that's an important
and with a affordable component that's inclusionary, but they're not affordable units.
Does Mr. Goodson want to make a comment?
I would love to just comment on that. There's really 2 points there. First of all, the senior apartments aren't any different than the other apartments that you're working on. Really? And so, to Mr. Ehler's comments, those would apply to the extent they're accurate. Roughly they would apply to all the properties you're working on. But secondly, your senior tenants are more the probability is much higher that they're going to qualify as low-income tenants because they don't have any income. And they a lot of times are subsidized by their family, and they're trying to stay here in the local community.
But that doesn't count because it all depends on what you're renting it for, not what they're actually making. If it's a trust funder who makes zero money and their parents pay for it, you don't get credit for that person.
Well, there's a dual test. You have the test, the income of the tenant for any of the properties is one of the aspects of the low income, and then the other is the rent that you're charging, right?
Low income and affordable is not the same.
Okay.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Diane, do you want to make a
I was
comment?
just going to clarify. If the unit is deed restricted, then yes, we look at what the income of the household is along with what it's being rented at. But if it's not a deed restricted unit, in order for us to have it count as low income or very low, it's based on what it's being rented at.
And so these aren't deed restricted, right?
Thank you very much. These are not any different than any of the other apartments that you're talking about upzoning. They're exactly the same. They're just designed to accommodate seniors.
And to Mr. Goodson's point, that's what I was saying, is that we're, Joe, you mentioned several times that low income. They're not low income. They're market rate apartments we're upzoning, but we get credit for our RENA allocation this cycle. But as soon as we build them, we have to backfill them with a buffer or upzone within 180 days.
Right. But in the normal situation, not normal, but other than the senior assisted or senior apartment, there's inclusionary zoning and there's other factors that would see that certain developments have some affordable housing that is actually built and counted toward development of actual units.
Senior apartments are the same as regular.
So
are.
if they came in, inclusionary would apply.
Yeah, all right.
I got a quick question for you. Mr. Goodson brought up the park lifts or the parking lifts. Back in the day, it was kind of the rich and famous had the parking lifts. I know a couple of friends of mine who aren't famous and aren't rich who would like to do that live in Cardiff because of the parking there. Do we address that at all?
I mean, we don't have it as part of the parking standards. I think we have had maybe some houses that come in with them, but it's kind of part of maybe their.
Can we include it?
Well, we can look into it.
Okay.
I don't know. I haven't dealt with the parking lifts, so we can look into parking lifts.
Okay. And the comment about the elevator?
Say that again?
So maybe another way to approach the same question. Downtown Whole Foods, former Whole Foods, 3 stories, 33 feet is the limit. There's an elevator in that building, I assume. Otherwise, I don't know how we'd pass ADA. Is there an elevator in that building?
I know there's an elevator. I don't know how high up it goes because I know I've used it to go to from the downtown, the downstairs parking up to the next floor, but I don't know if it goes all the way up.
All the way to the top. So maybe that's a question to look into because that was zoned, the specific plan, I think, allows max 33 feet, not even
Correct.
37.
We have discussed the issue of elevators and other items such as that, and we would treat them just like we do under existing conditions. It'd fall under the zoning code of how we treat building heights. So we're not planning on making an exception related to these sites.
Okay.